John Richter is here as well. Really, really great to see all of you. I know you. We've worked together before, and it's through the Immersive Learning Research Network, which John is the CEO of, and particularly on the state of XR and immersive learning report. There was a 2021 report issued. I was involved in that. And now the 2022 report is coming out. So I want to introduce Chris Dede, who's a distinguished professor at Harvard University in education. I mentioned John Richter is the CEO of the Immersive Learning Research Network, and Maya Georgieva, who leads an innovative lab at the New School. So I want to try to, let's get us situated better here so that if we can better see you all. Thank you very much again for being here today. And the topic of our conversation is in particular the work that you've done on producing this annual State of XR and Immersive Learning report under the auspices of the Immersive Learning Research Network, also known as iLRN. John, you're the president and CEO of iLRN. Can you give us a brief overview of the organization and how the State of XR and Immersive Learning report fits within the organization's mission?
Sure. Thank you so much, Karen, for inviting us all today to be a part of the WebXR Education Summit, first of all. The Immersive Learning Research Network grew out of the American Education Research Association Special Interest Group on virtual environments for learning, immersive environments for learning, where Chris and I worked at AERA for a number of years. We branched out beyond AERA to try to work with the psychologists, the game designers, the computer scientists, and all these other amazing people working in immersive learning back in about 2014. So iLRN was born, and we started seeking out, trying to identify, share, and innovate on immersive learning. And that's our nonprofit mission. The State of XR report began with collaborations with our board member and colleague, Mark Lee, and he allowed us or helped work with us through an IEEE group called Icicle to collaborate, looking for finding all of the different emerging technologies and seeing interpreting how that might be useful to educational practitioners and researchers. The idea with the research, of course, is for us to catalog and find what works in immersive learning, but research takes a while to, get funded, go out, gather the data, put it all into writing, go and then publish it. So that, earliest you can possibly do that is about 2 years. And that's really fast. Of course, we know that this field, this immersive learning field, is just exploding. It's like the Cambrian or Precambrian explosion here of educational technology. So what's emerging is really important for us to talk about well before the research lands in publications. And so that's what this forecasting and futures expert project is about. And I'll let Maya. Oh, I just wanted to say also, it's so great to be here with Maya and Chris, two people that I look up to so much. They're both have been so great collaborating with iLRN, but personally, they're both mentors and friends to me as well. So this is really exciting.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yes. And I'm so glad you gave a shout out to Mark Lee there and mentioned his importance to this project. And Maya, you have been hugely instrumental in the production of the report for both 2021 and 2022. Can you tell us about the process of producing it?
Yes, I mean the report is it's probably one of the really amazing work we do and I do as the XR strategist for the report, principal investigator, and main author. And it's been amazing to also go now into the second cycle of the report. The report uses a Delphi method, meaning that we convene a panel from educators from across the world, and we actually spend a lot of time in actually making sure that this is a and well represented panel, bringing educators not just from the United States and Americas, but also from Europe, Asia, and all the way from South Africa and Africa across. So that is a really important part. And we convened the panel, the expert panel, with a kickoff session both times. Our first round was mostly online, mostly through a number of tools like forums, where practitioners and educators and researchers can really have a ongoing asynchronous conversation. Following our first round, we decided to actually add an additional layer, which is the synchronous forecasting working group, which I had the pleasure to facilitate 10 of them this spring, which brought us to ultimately to really the executive summary being presented at the iLRN conference. And during the forecasting groups, we actually get together in much smaller groups and work our way through the report main core 3 research questions. And we kept the research questions for round 1 and round 2 now in 2022 the same, with which they focus. Research question number 1 focus on the opportunity. What is the most promising opportunities in learning that XR and immersive technology can help fulfill? The second one focuses on what we experience daily, that while we are very excited and enthusiastic about the opportunities, there is barriers, and especially for those educators on the ground trying to pioneer that in their institutions. So our next question focuses on what are the greatest barriers for institutions and organizations adopting XR and immersive learning technologies. And our third question is meant to really work to look into the catalyst for innovation as we come together to really think about the future of immersive learning. We also want to look at what's existing today. What are some of the opportunities we can tap on and share that with the communities across the world? And at the same time, we want to provide some insight and we want to look into the future. And we take a sort of a really very specific approach in looking into the 3 to 5 years into the future, not 30 years from now, but something that educators and really administrators and practitioners and technologists and strategists and designers can take in and bring it back to their institutions, to their work, to their classroom. So our third question focuses on what XR and immersive or other complementary technologies, because it's not really about XR. It's really the conversion of XR, as we often talk about XR and AI, and thinking about also interfaces and haptics and in all of these related technologies and tools and developments that actually together have the potential to help transform learning, teaching, training, and research practice. So these are the core questions of the report that we very meticulously kind of followed through in a very ambitious timeline in about from January to April, as in small groups, both synchronously and asynchronously online, where panelists have the opportunity to contribute. And then we just presented the 2022, the State of XR and Immersive Learning executive report at the conference. The publication is coming in. The report is kind of like in motion. This is year round, but a lot of things are happening. So in year round, we also are shaping in how this executive summary will be actually distributed, shared with the community, and actually give the community the opportunity to participate in that release as we invite both the panelists and educators from across the world to think about the topics we have identified for 2022. So this is the long answer, but it's very important to say how this report really is. It's a collaborative effort, and it doesn't look into thinking about a technology or a platform or a approach, but really thinking about the affordances of immersive learning and what we can do with it, with our students and within our institutions and schools and universities.
That's great. Thank you, Maya. I really appreciate the thought that has gone into making this report happen. And I'd just like to mention for the Immersive Learning Research Network, it is immersivelrn.org. And you can find out more about all of their many initiatives there at that website. I'd like to now turn to Chris. Chris, you have many years of experience in educational technology, and you're a leading expert in the field. How would you describe the state of XR and immersive learning in education in 2022?
Well, I'd like to begin by thanking both Jonathon and Maya for their leadership, which has really been essential in developing this whole immersive research network. I started studying immersion in 1978 when a text-based computer game came out called Zork, the Great Underground Empire. And I started my research in VR 3 decades ago, in AR almost 2 decades ago. So I've seen a lot of generations come and go. The two things that I find very exciting right now, one of them is access, because the idea that for $300 now, you have a standalone VR helmet that you can put on and that will display some fairly sophisticated VR. This is just extraordinary. 30 years ago, the first thing that I did in our VR research was to buy a used $400,000 supercomputer for graphics, which has much less power than the modern cell phone. So we've seen incredible leaps in technology, and just as with the fax machine, the minute that you hit a certain price point, then all sorts of good things start to happen. The other is that VR is at one end of the spectrum with complete immersion in a virtual world, and augmented reality is sort of toward the other end of the spectrum with some virtuality over the real world. But in between the two, mixed reality now is really coming into the fore. And I've been working with a company called Immersion that does what's called digital puppeteering, where you have the equivalent of a flight simulator for human skills and can use mixed reality in order to accomplish that. So far from being close to mature, I think it's just exciting how the technologies keep evolving over time.
That's great. Thank you, Chris. Wow. That is truly some long experience there. And we have come a very long way. You have seen it. Yeah. And I want to keep you here in the foreground for a moment, because I want to follow up on that question. And what do you see as some of the most valuable and or surprising insights that have arisen from the state of XR and immersive learning reports? I want to have you speak to that, Chris, and then I'd like for John and Maya to also address that question.
Well, from my perspective, the reports are highlighting the intersection between artificial intelligence and XR, which I think is very exciting. I'm a co-principal investigator on a 5-year, $20 million institute from the National Science Foundation that looks at adult learning and online education through the lens of AI. And what we see with XR is that AI can help at both ends of the experience, that at the front end of the experience, AI can enable the world to be much richer, much more interactive, much more personalized to the user. And at the back end of the experience, the kind of analytics and pattern recognition that AI can do can help very much in near real time to sense things that are happening in the world and to literally configure the world and configure the feedback that users are getting to make it a great learning experience. So AI is another emerging technology, and the reports provide a very valuable way of keeping up with the intersection between two emerging technologies.
Yeah, that's great. It's hugely important and something we all need to be paying attention to. Can you, you mentioned your initiative for adult and online learners. It's called Silver. I'm going to get
No,
it.
it's actually called AI-ALOE.
Okay, AIALOV. Okay,
So
all
if
right.
you type that into a search engine, you'll get to see lots about what the Institute is up to.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. John or Maya, one of you two want to jump in and talk about what has been most interesting, surprising, or valuable from the report?
Go ahead, Maya.
I mean, I think that for me, as somebody who authored the 2020 report, and now walking our way through the 2022, I think it's important to say that how much sort of our experience of the pandemic shaped the 2020 report. And it's also very interesting that the work of the expert panel did start prior to the pandemic. And it really brought a really high level of enthusiasm. And it was very palpable in kind of the topics, the conversations, the opportunities educators saw in bringing immersive technology into education, all levels, formal and informal learning. I think the 2022 report was somewhat much more, I think, thoughtful in a way that while the enthusiasm exists and people just as impatient, I think there was a lot more, a high level of looking for the purposefulness, for creating meaningful experiences. And so the conversations really focus on really pedagogical strategies, theoretical framework, thinking about the student experience, thinking about designing spaces for students and teachers and faculty to come together, both on our physical campuses in the context of labs, as well as in our virtual campuses in the context of virtual spaces and worlds that our students and we can come together from across the world. So I think that was a much higher level of thoughtfulness in these conversations. It did also focus a lot of the conversation did focus on the lack still of quality content and how we can, we as educators and our students be engaging that in creating content and sharing content with each other, which links up to the lack of standards still, and we're looking into that. And a very acute awareness of questions around accessibility. Questions around standards, and probably the highest level of challenges, especially for us in education as we are working with students and very diverse learners, is the challenges around privacy and ethics. Now that more often we can actually invite our students, invite our learners in these spaces, the idea about privacy and ethics, I think, will very discussed almost at every single asynchronous session I was able to facilitate and lucky to facilitate. I think the very high level topic also that was discussed in this report was also the idea that the structural challenges that we faced in education. Oftentimes in the context of higher education, but also understanding just, sort of the purpose, rethinking, what a learning experience is, what immersive application can bring to it. And again, that was very much, very big part of the discussion. And as I said, that's why this was a very thoughtful panel. I really appreciated that, and in this conversation, in these sessions, looking up into the future, definitely looking into avatars, virtual worlds, AI, machine learning, I think a high level of interest and anticipation of more sensory interfaces and haptics. And you can't miss, but just I think for a lot of educators, particularly in the K through 12, but also in higher ed, the idea of the augmented reality classes, and I think that's sort of a real interest in being able to really kind of embody and live in mixed reality and connect with each other, and the potential of what this is to be and become. In the context of the student experience and learning with immersive technologies. So on a very high level, I think these are some of the topics that kind of was surfaced this year. And it's a very, very much, as I said, it was a panel that was anticipating more and asking for more.
Yeah, interesting. I think we were all kind of caught off guard by the pandemic, and it really required us to sort of think on our feet and maybe react in ways that we wouldn't have otherwise. But now we have had more time to think and reflect on where we are, and that seems to have been reflected in the report. John, how about you? What are some of the most exciting, interesting, surprising things that have emerged for you in the State of XR and Immersive Learning report?
Well, the community aspect, I think, and has been huge. Just getting the expert panel together, and I was a little surprised at the provision of a platform that allowed the experts to come together, and the timeliness and the need for having this group come together, not only to be able to synthesize their individual expertise, but just how wonderful it was when we were having these discussions, to be able to connect with others across the globe who were also experts in these things. And I think there's a number of reasons from that. Like Maya brought up the pandemic. The pandemic absolutely, I think, has really enhanced our desire to connect meaningfully with other people. And that this expert panel really provided that community aspect. But I think it's also sort of an aspect of the massive amount of dynamic change that's going on in this immersive learning field. And it's really hard, like drinking out of a fire hose kind of metaphor, for even the people who are living in this space on a daily basis, every day, working hard. It's not always easy to know all the things that are going on out there. And so this was really apparent this next time through for the State of XR and Immersive Learning report, of people were learning so much from each other. And so I am really pleased that we're moving towards this persistent environmental scanning, not just doing it a one shot, but like constantly doing this scanning of the horizon to see what's going on and matriculating that, with this incredible community that we've got going. And it's not just the Immersive Learning Research Network community, which is awesome, but the broader XR immersive community. Just what incredible people, what creativity, what incredible expertise. And boy, it requires a large group of people, because the amount of expertise that goes into these things is in themselves incredible. Each project, to have a high quality immersive learning experience, requires the computation knowledge, the game design knowledge, and the learning science knowledge, all packed into one experience to create a system. And it's just incredible with this State of XR reporting community and process, that to be a part of it. And so we're looking to expand this. And again, with Maya's leadership, actively helping us to develop this community, and Chris's leadership as our honorary, mentor and godfather, as it were, to be able to help us guide in these directions, as well as so many other people in the network. That's the thing that has surprised me, that the level of pulling together, and I guess the sense of meaning out of it has been just fantastic.
That's wonderful, John. And yeah, I completely agree with you about the importance of community, and do want to let people know, as I mentioned before, at immersivelearn.org, you can become a member of iLRN, and you can take part in these many activities that are taking place. And I also want to give a shout out to iLRN, because iLRN sponsors and supports my XR Women group, where we meet every Wednesday and learn from each other. A different kind of learning, but believe me, learning takes place there. And so we greatly appreciate your support for that sort of initiative, and not just learning maybe in the more academic sense there. So I want to leave a couple minutes for questions, but just briefly, I'd like to hear a little bit more from Chris about the next frontier. We talked about AI. Can you say a little bit more about that, and why that is so important in XR for education right now?
Well, I'm just wrote an article that's going to be published in the Journal of Technology and Teacher Education that talks about a sea change. And maybe once or twice in your lifetime, you see a sea change where you were living in Kansas and now you're living in Oz, and there aren't any ruby slippers to take you back. The pandemic has created a sea change, not because of the pandemic, which will turn into an endemic and go away in the way that prior pandemics have, but because of our response. The world is really hybrid now. Work is hybrid, politics is hybrid. People are trying to stop education from being hybrid, but I think hopefully all the other sectors of the world changing will force education to be hybrid. And once you have a hybrid world, immersion becomes really important for the non-face-to-face part of it. And so I just think that this sea change is going to create a wave of interest and value in immersive technologies that's going to greatly accelerate the evolution of the field. And I find that really exciting.
That's wonderful. Yes, I really look forward to seeing that article. And there's a question in the chat here. It says, Chris, for learning analytics, is XAPI still a thing for XR to measure learning experiences? And are there other tools or processes out there to measure it?
Well, XAPI is certainly useful. And of course, a lot of what's done in immersion is Unity-based. And that can be configured in different ways to send data to the learning analytics. I think an interesting frontier is to include not only data about what you're doing in the immersive world, but data about what you're revealing through the webcam. So that with the mixed reality simulation that I mentioned, immersion, you're both seeing how you interact with the virtual people, but you're also seeing through the webcam, and the users know about this. It's completely transparent, facial expressions, body language, and so on, that we're becoming increasingly able to interpret. Now, I think it's very important for privacy reasons that users give their permission and get value from anything that is involved in looking at their image and interpreting from their image. But that gives you two data streams now, what your behaviors are in terms of your avatar, if you will, and then what you are projecting in terms of the real world. So I think we're just beginning to understand the richness of the data that can be generated and the kinds of tools that are going to get us that data.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Chris. And thank you again for your time today. We're honored to have you here. Maya, you as well. Really appreciate your time. And John, thank you so much for being here